In the endgame, the role of the king changes. It changes from being the one who we're worried about protecting to a fighter coming out to help in the final stage of the game. Now, the king is really valuable if it's only the king and his little pawns that are trying to make it across the board to the other side. Today we're going to look at a tool that the king has to use very often in order to gain ground or invade his opponent's territory, and this tool is called the opposition. Here, for example, we see that if we have reached this position and it's our turn, if it's white's turn to move, then white can gain ground, invading the territory of his opponent. If we look in this next example, our opponent's king is on the other side, and so now we gain ground and go after those kingside pawns. In either one of those cases, you're going to win. Your king's going to come charging in and take those pawns. So now, of course, we go back and look at this position before we got there. This is where we're going to use this tool called the opposition. And our king will move in straight across from our opponent to gain the opposition. The opposition is when we're straight across from our opponent's king with one square in between. Now there's other examples where we're diagonal or further away, but this is what we call the direct opposition. One square in between us. And now black can't say pass. And this is an important point. All those pawns, those 4 pawns that he has, either can't move, or if they do, they simply get captured. So the black king has to give way. He's going to have to go one way or the other. If he goes over to e6, then we invade at c5. And if he goes to c6, then we invade at e5. If it was black's turn, black could have used the opposition defensively to keep our king out. Now imagine his king holding up the hands, stopping our king from coming in. And now we could shuffle to the side, and the black king will do the same. And then we shuffle back, and the black king does the same, and uses the opposition to actually keep us out of their position. Now, it's important to understand that opposition isn't really important until there's not many pawn moves left. Here, for example, if you gain the opposition, it doesn't really help because black just checks you, pushes you out, and that didn't accomplish anything for you. All right, so now let's have a look at when the opposition can become extremely important. The less pieces on the board, the less pawns on the board, then the opposition is really going to be a tool that we're going to have to use. We have to have our king in front of our pawn. The pawn becomes the more important one. Our king is going to escort that pawn to the other side. So if we look at this drawing, we can see that the pawn is going to go straight up to the top if the white king is up on the 7th rank, protecting those final 3 steps of the pawn. The black king, he's got nothing to do. He can't capture the pawn because you can't move a king next to a king. And that spot where the king, the white king, is guarding the pawn on its final 3 moves is what we call the golden square. And you're trying to get your king to the golden square. And your opponent is trying to keep you out of the golden square. And we're going to use that opposition. Let's have a look. Here we see that the king wants to gain the opposition in front of his pawn, and then the black king is going to have to give way. He can't say pass, he has to move one way or the other, and then the white king will get to invade further, and the pawn will be able to go walking up the board. So here we are, and we see we can gain ground against our opponent, and then we use the opposition again. We gain the opposition straight across, and the black king can't guard both golden squares. He has to go one way or the other. So he goes off to the side, and now we gain ground, get to the golden square, and our pawn goes walking in. Notice our pawn didn't move. Getting your king in position first was critical. Here, for example, first things first, don't push the pawn. Move your king in front, gain the opposition. The black king goes one way, you gain ground the other, and then get the opposition again. Whichever way he goes, you go up to the opposite, and the pawn goes walking in. We're using the opposition as a way to promote our pawn. But back to this position, the idea of invading by the opposition. Here, the white king, of course, goes to d4. And now the black king steps to the side. We get to invade, and he might start to go after our pawn, but we'll realize by counting it out that we'll easily be able to get a queen before our opponent and win the game. Now, in some situations, your opponent might gain the opposition against you, but remember, if you haven't exhausted all of your pawn moves, if you haven't used them up, then you can have what's called a reserved tempo, or a saved up move. Reserved means saved, and tempo is like a move. Here, white has a reserved tempo. That H pawn hasn't moved and can just go up one square. And now, white has the opposition. It's the black king that has to step to the side and allow the white king to invade the position. Here, we have to use the opposition defensively, but it's our turn. The black king has the opposition on us right now. So we have our A pawn, and we have reserved tempi. More than one. Tempo, 1. Tempi is more than 1. But the question is, should we move our A pawn up 1 square or 2? After we think about it for a while, we realize if we go up 2 squares, then the black pawn is going to come down, block us. We don't have any reserved tempi left. So let's just move it up 1. They push, then we push again, and boom, they step to the side, we go to the side, and we can go back and forth. But that way we're able to get the opposition against their king and use it defensively to keep their king out. Back to this situation, our final position, we see that black has gained the opposition in this king and pawn promotion plan, but we gain it back using that tool we just learned, reserve tempo. And we can push the pawn, and that gives us the opposition. The black king will have to step to the side, we gain ground, we'll gain the opposition again, get to the golden square, and push that pawn in. All right, that's it for the opposition. I'll check you later.